What is going on, you guys, and welcome back to the channel. You guys have been keeping up with my videos. You would have seen that we got my Radium fuel rails, Cobb 1300cc injectors, my Radium fuel pulse dampers, my Radium TGV deletes, built the whole wiring harness, and now we're at the point where I need to get my fuel lines run and get my fuel pressure regulator installed. So like I showed in a previous video, I'm gonna be running the Radium fuel pressure regulator and the Radium fuel plumbing kit. The only thing I don't like about this kit is I like that Radium stuff is green, but with the theme of my engine bay, this stuff has green lettering on it and it's not braided line. So what I did was I went on Amazon and picked up way too much of this stuff, to be honest. But I got 100 feet of kind of like this red striped black braided wire loom. And this is going to wrap around all of those lines to make them look 10 times cleaner, and so you don't have to see the green writing. Now in this install, I'm going to be following Radium's instructions off the website almost to a T. So I'm going to time lapse through a lot of me doing it just so that the video isn't going to be like 50 minutes long. So I'll put a link to the instructions down below. Like I said, I'm gonna try and follow their instructions to a T, but with my setup and the way I'm routing things, I might have to change it up a little bit. And to be honest with you guys, this is my first time doing this. Again, no idea what I'm doing, but as always, we're gonna figure it out. Like I said, first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna get this fuel pressure regulator set up with all the fittings we need on either side of the pressure regulator. Now I got all the fittings onto the fuel pressure regulator, and I got the mount mounted to it as well with the two M6 Allen head screws they give you with the two nuts on the back side. So on this fuel pressure regulator, this side with the two nipples is going to be the back of your regulator. And there's going to be one that's a 22 mil, one that's a 19 mil. And then both the fittings on the front side of the regulator are both 19 mils. And this one is an Allen head, but I can't remember what size it is. Now on these back two ports on the back of the regulator, where it says high pressure in or out, that's going to be your high pressure in, so your feed line. And then your bottom one, which says low pressure out only, is going to be your return line. So feed line meaning fuel pumping from your fuel pump comes into this line and comes out this side. Return meaning it's going to come back from the pressure regulator and go back to your fuel tank. Now with all these fittings, I actually had to put the pressure regulator in a vise just to get them nice and snug to seat the O-ring on the bottom. Make sure you lube the O-ring with a little bit of engine oil, not too much, just to help the O-ring just so that it doesn't get pinched or anything when you're putting it in. Just snug them up real good with a wrench. Don't over tighten them. They are aluminum fittings. I would recommend using an AN wrench, but I just use a regular wrench and it worked perfectly fine for me. Now on the other side of your regulator, you're gonna have one block off plug on the bottom and two AN fittings up top. These two fittings up top are both gonna be feed lines, and each one is gonna go to an individual rail. And the way this regulator works for the feed and return system is it's just gonna pump your feed through the top, and then it's just gonna regulate the pressure, and whatever's not needed, this regulator is just gonna dump back into the return. So it makes it much cleaner. All you have to do is run two individual lines to each fuel rail. You don't have to have an ugly return line running through the engine bay too. So it's nice and clean, only two lines to each rail. So now that I explained that, hopefully that wasn't too boring and way too specific. But now let's take their two other M6 bolts that they supply you and get this thing mounted to the body of the car. Now we got the fuel pressure regulator mounted. There's two little mounting holes right behind the fuse box that it mounts to. I'm actually shocked at how close this is to the fuse box and how close it is to this brake line here. I'm gonna have to run some of the fuel line over and then into the feed and return lines there. But now that we got that all set up, let's get the adapter installed so I can install the little fuel pressure gauge that sits on one of the feed lines here. Now I got the fuel pressure gauge and the adapter fitting installed. Make sure you put some Teflon tape on the threads of the fuel pressure gauge before you thread it onto the adapter fitting. And then once you get it on there, just hand tight, go about 1.5 to 3 turns around. You can kind of gauge on how tight it is if you're gonna go 3 turns or not. I went about 1.5, and I have the gauge facing so that I can read it facing this way right now, just because that's how I want it to sit, and it's freaking tight. So it better not leak. Then on the adapter fitting, just get it nice and tight with a wrench. Use an AN wrench if you got one. I didn't have one, so I just went pretty light with a regular wrench and got it as tight as I could. Now there's going to be two 120-degree fittings that you're just going to temporarily install onto the regulator. They both just install on the front side on each feed line. Don't tighten them down yet. You just want to install them just so that then you can run your line to your fuel rails, and then you can cut the line to length so that it meets up with these little quick connect fittings on the end of these 120-degree bends. Now since I got those two fittings onto the regulator, what I'm going to do, since I don't know exactly what fittings I'm gonna use on the fuel rails yet, just because of routing. I don't know how I'm gonna route it yet. So I'll just time lapse through me getting the fittings onto the regulator, and then I'll show you guys which ones I decided to go with after. So to give you an update on everything I just did, like I said before, I had some oil just in a cup just to dab on my finger and lube up all the O-rings before I put any of the fittings on. So on the fuel rail on the passenger side of the car and on the driver's side actually, I just put the 8mm Allen head block off plug on the front of the fuel rail on both sides because I want the front of this to look as clean as possible, and I'm gonna route the fuel lines under the intake manifold at the back. Then at the back of the passenger side fuel rail, what I did was I used one of these little swivel fittings that they give you. It's just a little 4mm Allen head on the end, just get it nice and snug. And then there's a little 45-degree bend fitting with one of those quick connect barbs on the end of it. I tightened this swivel fitting right down to the fuel rail because it's installed good at this point, but I just left this 45-degree bend loose just so that then what I can do is I can take this fitting off, install the hose onto this fitting, then I can route my hose however I want it routed so that it reaches the regulator over there. Then I can cut the hose to length, and then I can use the remaining hose for the rail on that side and the lines that come from out of the body of the car into the regulator. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get the hose installed to that 45-degree fitting on the passenger side fuel rail, but I'm gonna take the fitting off to get it installed. Then I'm gonna run my fuel line the way I want it to so that it reaches. I'll cut it to length, get it installed to the other hose. Before I finish this line 100%, I just want to show you guys where I routed it. So the line from your passenger side fuel rail is going to be going to the line that has your fuel pressure gauge on it. And I got it routed coming down from here, under all my wires there, behind this driver's side TGV. And then once it goes behind that driver's side TGV, it goes under the intake manifold and it routes right under the wire harness here, right above that coolant pipe that I cut when I did the expansion tank delete, and then runs under the wire harness all the way over to right behind the alternator here. And I'm just gonna zip tie it to the wire harness there. And then on the back side here, you can just see it comes from under the harness over the main coolant line here, and then straight back to the 45-degree fitting that I installed on the passenger side fuel rail. So now what I'm gonna do before I get that soft line installed to the fitting where the fuel pressure gauge is I'm gonna wrap this red and black braided protectant around the lines just so like it'll help with heat a little bit because it's gonna be so close to those coolant lines and right running along the top of the block. So it'll help with heat a bit, and it will help me in the engine bay separate my fuel lines from my braided wire harness. I'll have a red loom on my fuel line and then the black loom on my wire harness. So let's get that line pulled out of here, get it braided, and then we'll get it installed onto the fitting that goes to the fuel pressure gauge there. And now I got that line that goes to the passenger side completely installed. I actually routed it a little bit differently than what I said before. I still routed it down under here, just like I said before, behind the TGV on the driver's side. But then under the intake manifold, I actually went over top of that wire harness piece just because looking at it in the engine bay, I wanted to show that braided fuel line just because I think it looks nice. The color of the red matches the intake manifold. And this way it keeps it a little bit higher just so it's not sitting right on that coolant passage. And I was a little bit worried that this hose that I cut down there was going to end up cutting through the fuel line. So I ran it up top. It'll keep it a little bit cooler. Ran it behind the alternator and then still zip tied it to the same spot on the wire harness right there. And then as this side, it still comes back to this AN fitting here. So now my next step is going to be to take this fitting off here. I already got this fitting and that fitting over there tightened up with an 11/16 wrench. Now my next step is going to be to build the line that comes from this fuel rail up to this port on the fuel pressure regulator. There we go. I don't know how well you guys are gonna be able to see in there, but I got this line tightened up and this line tightened up on the fuel pressure regulator. In the Radium instructions, they tell you to route the line up like this into the AN fitting, but I wanted to look cleaner, so I routed it downwards and up to there. So now my feed lines are completely done. Now I just need to do the feed line and return line on the back of the regulator. And the way I'm gonna do this is Radium gives you 2 little quick connectors that connect to the factory fuel lines. And they give you 4 little hose clamps here. You're gonna put 2 hose clamps on the lines that connect to the fuel pressure regulator, and then you're gonna put 2 hose clamps on the hose where it connects to this quick connector here. Now, before I get started on this, I figured I'd just show you guys which line is what. This top line here with the black plastic wrap on it is your feed line. And this bottom line here with the gray plastic wrap on the line is your return line. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna run a line from your black feed line here to the top feed line on your regulator. Then you're gonna run a line from your gray return line to the bottom return line on your regulator. Last couple lines, baby, let's get it. Oh, baby, that looks sick. Oh my God. I got my feed line up top, return line on the bottom. I braided the lines so that they'd match the other feed lines that go to the fuel rails. And oh my God, this looks so good. The reason I went with the red loom is because it separates my fuel lines from the wire loom. The wire loom is black and then the fuel line is red. I would have done my wire loom in the red loom, but I couldn't because the red loom is a completely enclosed loom. It doesn't actually split in half, so I couldn't wrap it around the wires. And I couldn't find any red loom that split in half, so decided to go with red loom for the fuel lines and black loom for the wire harness. Oh my God, does that look good? Just so you guys see what it did, I hose clamped it to the quick connects there, and then you just hose clamp it onto the nipples on the back of the regulator. Now that all the fuel lines are in, and everything's tight, I'm gonna go turn the key and get that fuel pump running, pump some fuel in there, and we're gonna see if she holds fuel pressure. If that fuel pressure gauge start dropping, we got a leak somewhere. Let's get this battery hooked up. We're gonna hop inside, turn the key, spray and pray, baby. All right, let's see it. I hear fuel pump. What do we got for fuel pressure? Moment of truth. Oh shit, it's like 10 PSI and it's falling. Where are we leaking? Wait a minute, I'm an idiot. I just put a fresh fuel pump in this thing. There's gonna be no fuel where the fuel pump sits inside of the hanger assembly. So I'm probably gonna have to turn this key a couple times just to get the fuel pump to suck up some fuel. See if she starts gurgling. Oh yeah, there we go. Now she sounds nice and smooth. Let's go see what we got for fuel pressure. Let's go, baby. 40 PSI on the dot. Now we just let her sit for like 10 minutes, see if that gauge drops. I'm gonna go around, check for any leaks, make sure nothing's leaking, and we should be good to go, honestly. I wish I could start this thing right now, but I can't because we still have so much more shit to do. One thing I forgot to mention was the vacuum nipple for the fuel pressure regulator. The way your fuel pressure regulator works is it goes off vacuum off your manifold. The vacuum pulls the diaphragm inside the fuel pressure regulator up, and when it pulls that diaphragm up, it's letting fuel flow in. So the more vacuum your engine is under, or the more load your engine is under, the more air is going to be sucking this diaphragm up, which is going to allow more fuel to flow into your injectors. So what you're going to do if you have a stock system is you're just going to run a line directly from this nipple to this nipple on your intake manifold here, just so it gets direct vacuum from your intake manifold. But for me, since I'm running 2 fuel pulse dampers, 1 on each rail, I need to connect both fuel pulse dampers in line with the vacuum line that goes to the regulator. If you decided to weld another nipple on the manifold somewhere, you could go directly to that with your fuel pulse damper, but I only have the 1 nipple. That sounded fucked up. I only have the 1 nipple on the left side of the intake manifold. So what I'm gonna need to do is I'm gonna need to run a vacuum line from the fuel pulse damper up to here, from the other fuel pulse damper on the right side, under the intake manifold, up to this same spot. And then I'm gonna need a little 3 nipple piece here that will attach the line from the fuel pressure regulator and both fuel pulse dampers to this nipple on the intake manifold. I just said nipple way too many times in one video, so just ignore that. I got a bunch of 5/32 sized vacuum line that I'm gonna run from the passenger side to the driver's side, and then Radium supplies this 5/32 sized hose with the fuel pulse dampers. It should work for the driver's side because it's a lot closer to that vacuum nipple. Then I also have 2 little vacuum tees here that I'm gonna use to tie in all 3 pieces, the regulator and both fuel pulse dampers. Let's get it. Well, I got all my vacuum lines run, but this is another one of those times where I regret something that I did. If you guys watched my TGV delete fuel system upgrade video, I think it was part 2, where I started on my expansion tank delete. I cut the hard lines that are under the intake manifold, and honestly, I wish I would have kept a little bit more of the hard line and cut it in a different spot, and I'll show you why. So start with showing you guys how I have all my vacuum lines run. It's nice and clean. You can't really see any of them. I tried to tuck them the best I could. But first, let's start at the regulator here. I have a line coming off the regulator that comes down behind the bracket. Then I don't know how well I'm going to be able to show this, but it then comes down from the bracket, follows my fuel line under the fuel rail here. And then that line goes down under my injector, right to the bottom part of that little vacuum tee that I put right there. Then the top nipple on the vacuum tee comes straight up to my manifold, which comes up from that nipple behind the fuel rail directly to my manifold. Then the third line on that 3-port vacuum tee goes straight from that vacuum tee right to another vacuum tee. Then one of the ports on that second vacuum tee on the left there goes right into the fuel pulse damper, as you can see there. And then the other one goes to the passenger side fuel pulse damper. So that third nipple runs directly under the TGV. As you can see right there, I ran it under the TGV in that small hole. I haven't decided if I'm going to put it under this coolant hose or above. I know that coolant hose is going to get hot and I don't want it sitting right against it, so I'm probably going to move it under the coolant hose. But for now, I'm going to leave it there until I route my AOS and stuff. Then this is where I wish I cut this hard line in a different spot. I like where I cut it here because I ran this line through that hard line to keep it away from the heat of the engine and the main coolant line and everything like that. And yes, I still have to weld that bracket. I just haven't brought the welder over to the shop. So I ran it through that line. I don't know how well you can see in there. This is a super hard angle to get. You can see the hose coming out of that hard line right there. It comes out of the hard line on the other side of it. Then I have it routed right over top of this main coolant pipe under the PCV line, and I have it zip tied to the bracket there, but not too tight so you don't squish the vacuum hose, just a little bit just to hold it there. Then I have it routing behind this TGV there, under all the harnesses, right to the port on that fuel pulse damper. And the reason I wish I would have cut this hard line in a different spot is because this hard line actually runs directly to the back of that TGV on the passenger side. So if you guys just picture this for a sec, this would have lined up with the end that I had it cut there. And this line would have mounted to that bracket that I cut down there. And then that line would have ended like right here if I would have decided to cut this line right there. And if I would have cut the line right there, I would have been able to run that vacuum line all the way through this hard line to protect it from any of the heat from the engine. It would have come out right at the end of this line. And then I could have ran it directly under the TGV, just like I did on that side, and ran it directly to the fuel pulse damper there. But I already cut it. So no regrets. We're just going to keep sending it because I want to drive this car. It's been on jack stands for way too long. It needs to get on the road. So I'm super happy with how all of this turned out for the most part, except for that one vacuum line where I could have ran it through the hard line, but whatever, we're just going to send it. And the only other thing I don't like is how much of a rat's nest everything's turning into here. And I'm going to need to run an intercooler pipe here. So I'm definitely going to have to move some of that around. And if you guys did this full install, obviously I can't start my car right now, but start your car up. Make sure you have no vacuum leaks. Make sure you have no fuel leaks, and make sure your fuel pressure is where you want it to be. If it's not, you can adjust it on the top of the regulator. Just by turning this little dial on the top, you can adjust it more or less. You guys are probably gonna need to talk to your tuners about that one and what they want for fuel pressure. I'm gonna leave mine at 40 now, and then when I get on the dyno, we can dial it to wherever we want it to be. But yeah, I primed my fuel system. It held 40 PSI for like 8 hours until the regulator started to bleed some of it back into the return line. Now, after like over 24 hours, it's still sitting at like 25 PSI, almost 30. And I checked for leaks in all my lines. I didn't have anything. I'm definitely still going to check for leaks once I get the car running. But this is where I'm going to end this video because I got a lot more installs to do. I got a lot more videos to make. And I'm kind of on a tight timeline now because if you guys are from Alberta, the car will be at Driven Edmonton on August 14th. It's going to be in a booth with my group here in Edmonton. We go by YEG Subies. I will link the Instagram account down in the description if you guys want to sauce them a follow. I hope this video helped you guys out. If you guys are running the Radium fuel pressure regulator or the fuel pulse dampers and you guys are installing this plumbing kit, let me know what you guys think of this install in the comments down below. Rate it on a clean scale, 1 to 10 maybe, something like that. If anybody even watched this to the end of the video, usually people don't. But yeah, peace out. I will catch you guys in the next one.